that I was terrified of freckled people in kindergarten because I thought that they had the plague because I had never seen a freckled person before. But that's not really cultural, so I digress. As I grew up, though, these differences did affect me more and more. And part of that is because I'm Mexican. My parents are Mexican. But I was raised in the United States and taught in American schools, surrounded by American peers. So in a sense, I was Mexican at home and American in the streets, so to speak. And I learned these American values and ideas, and I would bring them home. But what are our American values and ideas? Oh, the clicker doesn't work. These general ideas of free speech, free thought, political correctness, the general idea that my life is for me to decide for what's best for me. It's individualism. Individualism is at the core of American culture, and there's a beauty to it, but it's not universal. My parents are not individualists. For them in our culture, there's a very different way of valuing things, as I'll be describing later. So when you have this clash of cultural mentalities, there can be conflicts both large and small. So in the spirit of making cultural understanding within reach, today we are going to explore 3 separate cultures from around the world and some of their cultural values and identities. Before I begin, I would just like to say that out of the thousands of cultures throughout the world, I was only able to select 3 due to time that I either had personal experience with or knew someone who did. Additionally, I am in no way attempting to stereotype nor misrepresent any group of people. I am simply comparing prominent cultural values in one area to the United States or to another. So with that being said, let's go into the first cultural value of familism in my home country of Mexico. Now, familism isn't something that you can really define with a sociological definition that doesn't do it justice. It's something that you have to live or see through with examples. A little over a year ago, my family and I went to see the movie Coco. Raise your hand if you've seen it before. Have you seen it? Yeah, almost everyone. Right, so what I loved about this movie was not only the beautiful message that it sent, but also the extremely accurate representation of Mexico and our values. You see, in the movie, the protagonist, Miguel, loves to play the guitar, but much to his dismay, the matriarchs in his family have banned any and all music from being played in order to prevent another incident like that from the past. So despite being a fictional tale, what may come across to the audience as an archaic or even oppressive rule really had the best family interest at heart. It was to prevent the family from being split up and to keep it one and unified, because in Mexico, family is always one. Familism is when you're a baby and you're about to be baptized and your entire family is invited and they all show up and turn it into a mini wedding. Familism is when growing up as a kid, your mother doesn't take excuses and is not afraid to discipline you in order to make for a better family. Things such as using your phone at the dinner table, dame tu teléfono, or fighting with your siblings, ve por el cinto, or even la chancla. And I'm sure that most Mexicans watching would understand that joke. But in Mexico, we know that tough love is still love, and we know that our parents do it to make not only for a better person, but for a stronger family. And family interests are always at the heart. Familism is when you grow up a little bit and you move out, but you still make sure to eat lunch every weekend with your family and your parents, or if you're not in town, giving them a call to make sure that they're okay. Familism is growing up and having a family of your own that you have to make difficult choices and sacrifices for. For several millions of people, that sacrifice was illegally immigrating into the US to provide a future for their children free of violence and free of poverty. For those more fortunate, such as my own parents, that was still leaving their entire life behind and starting over in a new country in order to provide better educational opportunities for me and my sister. And as you grow up and the health and the financial issues start to set in, familism is the assurance that your family will always be there for you no matter what. During hard times, they'll help you pay off your debts. In the event that grandma or grandpa suffers from a heart attack or a stroke, the entire family goes to help, and they'll even help pay off the medical bills, because no one should have to go through that alone, because that's just family and that's what you do. Now, the justification for a lot of these throughout the life of Mexican is simply because it's family and it's what you do. And it may be frustrating at times that that's the only justification, but in Mexico it's a strong enough justification because family is stronger together. At the end of the movie Coco, Miguel's family anxiously embraces him back from the land of the dead. And in a heartwarming final scene, he approaches his great-grandmother, Mama Coco, at the hour of her death and sings to her the song, Remember Me, or Recuérdame. Because in Mexico, even at the hour of your death and after you have passed, your family will be there for you and we will remember you, because that's family and that's what you do. Now, across the world, not only do they remember their ancestors, but also the sayings of a 2,000-year-old sage. A few weeks ago, I was at my Chinese teacher, Mrs. Wang's house, waiting for my parents to pick me up. And while I was waiting, we began to discuss her 2-year-old daughter, Chelsea, who, come to find out, could already speak both Mandarin and English, which is impressive. But even more impressive was that she could start reading and recognizing Chinese Han characters. But if that's not good enough, Chelsea, the 2-year-old bilingual, could recite 8 poems from Confucius. And I love that it was Confucius himself who instituted this educational ethic in Chinese culture. One of the many things that I love about China's culture is how long-standing and enduring this emphasis on education has been. As Mrs. Wang, who's in the audience, explained to me, Confucius taught this philosophy 2,000 years ago, saying that by studying diligently, working hard with a love of learning, and becoming a cultured person, you not only improved yourself, but also society, and that would eventually lead to societal harmony. I saw this firsthand when I went to the People's Republic of China last summer for a 5-week study abroad trip, which was very humbling to do. And one thing that I saw was that this philosophy carried over 2,000 years into modern China, where the majority of students focus very heavily on their academics and their school life, even from a young age. But it's important to note that education, in the sense that I'm referring to it here, is not simply school or your core subjects or your tests. It's being a cultured person as well, and it's the culture of your country. It's the history of your country, it's art, it's literature, it's music, it's poetry. While I was there, I was shocked by the amount of students and adults who could recite me poems from Li Bai from 800 years ago, or who could sing me songs from the Song Dynasty, or play a traditional instrument, or who could with very much pride detail me the history of nearby West Lake. The Chinese appreciation for their own culture, their own art, their literature is absolutely beautiful. We see this culture reflected in terms of research and the hard sciences as well. And we can see this in schools. Let me give you an example. The school that I went to, Hangzhou number 14 Middle School, had an entire building dedicated to the sciences called the Science Center. This was complete with a real fully equipped biology lab, a real fully equipped chemistry lab, an observatory, and an entire room dedicated to pregnancy studies. So we can see that this educational culture has allowed for this investment in education and in schools, which has arguably allowed China to progress onto the modern stage in the way in which it has. So while in the United States we value entertainment, sports, community service, activism, alongside, if not more than, education and culture, China sees those two as fundamental to their society. So to what degree in the US do we value education and culture, and to what degree should we? Because from China's perspective, those two are pillars of a good society, not only what makes you a good citizen, but what makes society functional, and ultimately leads to the harmony that Confucius sought. While researching Chad, I didn't have Confucius, but I did have Muhammad de jour. And for those of you that haven't seen him running around in the halls, Muhammad is a Westfield student and a native of Chad who is very involved in his culture and was very eager to share it with me. Now, I was especially interested in learning about Chadian culture because, unfortunately, in the Western world, African cultures are often underrepresented or misrepresented, and we don't really give them the credit nor proper analysis that they deserve. So for that reason, I was very honored to learn about Chad and hear Muhammad's story. When interviewing Muhammad, I very bluntly asked him, what is the most important cultural value in Chad? He told me that it was loyalty. And he went on to describe loyalty to your family, loyalty to your friends, and the very important bond and strength in that. But perhaps more uniquely to Chad and in a greater context, loyalty to your tribe. Now, I had a vague concept of what tribes were in some African cultures, but I asked him to elaborate. And he told me that first and foremost, it's important to make the distinction that tribe in no way means primitive. That's a Western misconception. The word more accurately means ethnic group. And there are about 110 of these ethnic groups in Chad alone, ranging from very local to very large, despite having similar languages such as French and Arabic as the national language. But these ethnic groups often share a common culture, a common language, a common ancestry, and live in a similar location as well. Muhammad went on to compare the bond within these individual ethnic groups as comparable to that of an extended family group or an extended friend group, one that can come with very much friendliness, very much support, and very much pride, because it's with other people that you can identify with. So we can see that this view on ethnicity is very different from what we would have here in the United States. The view becomes more complicated when compared to the Western idea of the nation and national identity as a whole, which is what you and I would consider a nation or national identity to be. Let's take a look back at history. In the 1800s, Europe began to develop the idea of the nation state. So that's within our borders. We are Germany, we are France, we are Britain. And they went into Africa and they colonized them. And they committed very many horrific injustices. But one thing that they did was they imposed ideas on regions such as Chad. In the 1900s, countries such as Britain or France decided to leave Africa. And so Britain and France, or in Chad's case specifically France, looked at the map of Africa and almost arbitrarily drew borders, saying, this is Chad, this is Rwanda, this is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, etc. But they had absolutely no regard that within these arbitrary lines that they had drawn, there were completely different ethnic groups from completely different cultures that did not identify with each other. So for these ethnic groups, they suddenly had this label imposed on them by foreign imperialists, perhaps forced to support a government that they didn't support, or taking a national identity that they didn't consider themselves to be a part of. And so arguably, Western colonialism has severely impacted ethnic relations in Africa, or Chad, specifically even to this day. Muhammad's ethnic group is the Zagawa people, which is 2% of the population but is politically dominant. And Muhammad tells me that while he enjoys much support from his ethnic group, it can come with the side effect of friction and distrust with other ones as well, as I described before. This is potentially comparable to how the United States, like Chad, also has rich ethnic diversity, but a history of conflict with them as well because of injustices committed. So to what degree in the United States is ethnicity important as an identity? And what value do we place on that? To what degree does it divide more or does it unify more? And how does that compare to the way that Chad sees it? Because in Chad, your ethnic group is very important. But Muhammad tells me that with that, you know someone will always have your back 100% of the time. Now we've gone through 3 out of thousands of cultures throughout the world, and you might be thinking, that's really interesting, but Benjamin, what's the point? And I promise that there is a point. The point is that we have to acknowledge that other cultures, people, and ways of thinking exist. Ours are not universal, and the world is so much bigger than you or I or anyone could ever imagine it to be. But it's fascinating to learn about the way that other people view life or how they view the world through their culture, because it gives us much insight into the soul of another group of people. Throughout this talk, some of you may have felt that you liked or related to one of these cultures or more of them more and wanted to have that. And maybe for some of you, they didn't align with your values at all, but at least you understood. And maybe that's because we're really not that different. We're all humans, no matter race nor culture. But the most important thing is to understand, because understanding right now is more important than ever to unity. America is a country proudly founded on the synthesis of different cultures from throughout the world. We open our doors to those outside and allow different cultures to be within reach. So now, after exploring, examining, and perhaps beginning to understand some cultures from around the world, let's reflect on how we treat and value those cultures when they come into our own country and help make cultural understanding be within reach. Thank you.